You're listening to Cultivation Elevated, hosted by Michael Williamson and Anders Peterson, where we discuss vertical farming and the future of cannabis and food production.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? From Pip Horticulture, I'm Michael Williamson, and you're listening to Cultivation Elevated. Today, Anders and I are joined by Ian Miller, CEO of Catalyst BC, a leading global cannabis consulting firm that has secured over 60 cannabis licenses in the US and internationally. Ian is also one of the co-founders of Colorado-based Silver Peaks Holding, where Ian supported the raise of $60 million in private equity to create a fully vertical 25-plus store operator with multiple cultivation facilities and manufactured infused products facilities. Ian also co-founded Nevada-based The Soulless Companies, DBA Ether Gardens, where Ian led the raise of $22 million in private equity for a medical cannabis license with full CGMP design and foresight for FDA and DEA regulations. Ian is the VP of North American Sales Channel for Delta Power Boats Americas, where Ian brought a formerly unknown high-end performance yacht brand from Sweden to the Americas via Miami Beach, Florida. In 2014, Ian was on the founding team for LoopPay, a payment application that was quickly acquired by Samsung for $250 million, one of the most significant acquisitions made by Samsung to date. Ian is a Florida licensed general contractor and has been featured on shows like Extreme Homes. Ian earned a master's degree in construction management and a bachelor's degree in architectural design from the University of Florida, go Gators, and graduated with high honors of summa cum laude. Ian Miller, welcome to the show.
Hey,
I remember the first time I read your resume, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I looked at when you graduated from college, which wasn't that far around from when I graduated. I looked at the diversity of your background and that intro I just gave. If I had to give your full intro, we'd be here for 20 minutes. I think we first met, maybe, was it Vancouver? Is that where we first met in person?
that sounds right.
Like a trade show or something to that nature. And then I remember meeting you and still being skeptical. And then as I got to know you, I was like, man, this guy is maybe a genius, maybe a Swiss Army knife. It's just kind of done a lot of things. And so it's been a privilege to be one of your colleagues, one of your friends, and to get to know you over the years. That all being said, let's kick it off. Today, I know we could talk about a million things with you. One of the subjects that we want to talk about today for our listeners is kind of what we define as first mile services. So everything from construction administration, planning, financial modeling for CEA and cannabis facilities. So my first question today is, what are some of the unique challenges creating financial models for the cannabis industry compared to more traditional sectors, and how do you address them?
So I would start with saying that the industry has a unique feature of a combination of sort of commoditization and margin compression that everybody knows about at this point. We know it's going to occur. It isn't a question of if. Knowing the slope or sort of speed of that change tends to be kind of the voodoo, if you will, in figuring out how each state is going to behave. So that's definitely something that's very unique, as opposed to more traditional sectors, which are more mature. They're less likely to have the sort of of competitive behavior and the enhanced sort of down ramping of margins and whatnot. I would say that the ability of operators to hit KPIs that are really, really important is extraordinarily variable. You don't know sort of going into a model, is this cultivator going to hit 40 grams a square foot? Are they going to hit 75? Are they going to hit 100? Are they going to bat above 100? You really just don't know. Closely related to that, I would say operator ambitions versus what they and their team are actually capable of doing are also highly variable, and that is one of those sort of unique challenges that I personally face when I'm creating models. Another one is that virtually all models that I do, at least, are they're perfect startups, right? They're unknown, possibly inexperienced teams, new area, new regulatory body, and those all kind of complex together to make a bit of a challenge. And then I would say one of the interesting ones, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily unique to cannabis, but being that this is a sort of fast moving, fast evolving industry, the ability of let's call it like founding teams or founding operators to finance according to the cash loading that they actually need for their project. Like, every month there's a certain amount of money that they need to spend. Number one, do they have that money? Number two, can they get it? Can they pull it down from investors? That's one of those sort of unique or more unique and interesting challenges that we face, I think, from a practical standpoint, as well as when we're creating performance.
One of the things that you mentioned was the kind of ambitions of these entrepreneurs, and what they believe is possible. It's always, I think, a bit difficult pill to swallow for some of the new operators, when their business plan sounds like everyone else's business plan, which is essentially, I'm going to be a low cost producer of a high quality product, and they realize that
And
being a
lots of
low
it.
yeah, yeah, and but they don't realize what does it take to be a low cost producer, or depending on your perspective on things, low cost is a subjective mindset. If they come from traditional agriculture and tomatoes and peppers and some of that stuff, those folks really understand what it means to be a low cost producer. The cannabis folks seem to over automate in some areas, under automate in other areas, overspend in certain areas, and then underspend in some certain areas. How do you balance out, I guess, some of these unrealistic expectations when you're working with a client or customer? Most of these folks, most of these groups, they have these unrealistic expectations, but they're all going to be the best. And they all have the general same business plan of like, we're going to be a low cost, high quality producer. But the reality of doing that is very different. How do you manage where to encourage people to spend money and where to tell them to maybe do some more value engineering?
Yeah, it's a really good kind of deep question. I will often tell clients, something along the line of, the average person comes in the industry knowing that, if they sort of take some seeds and throw them over their shoulder into their backyard, something's going to grow. You will grow weed, right? It's going to happen. Um, Quality, consistency, yield, all of those things, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I would say that the most important investment that people often make as entrepreneurs in the space is planning in the beginning, and planning to win from the beginning. And there's a saying that goes something like, um, uh, you either fail to plan or you plan to fail. And I think that's extremely true in this industry, given how complex it is, from variability of real estate, variability of workforce, variability of regulatory environment. There's so many things in this industry that are highly variable, that if you don't have and haven't invested in a high quality plan to succeed, the chances that you've planned to fail are I would say abnormally high, probably more so than most startup businesses, in fact.
Mhm. And kind of going back to that financial modeling question and the variability you're
Yep.
speaking of, that was something I ran into that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on too. I remember creating my first financial projection for a cannabis business. I was like 22 years old. My dad is a CPA. He's a CFO of a software company. So when he saw me
Okay.
doing, my first financial model, he of course wanted to look over my shoulder and see what I was doing. And one thing he really struggled with, compared to other industries he worked in, is the variability of modeling around such a variable product of a plant, moisture loss, yield changes. He wanted it to fit into, a widget, like one unit
Hmm.
of measurement. And that just took him a long time to wrap his brain around. When you first started doing these projections into cannabis businesses with the variability of plant growth, how did you address that? And is that something you still struggle with on these projections and models?
Yeah, also a good question. I think that there's a level of um, sort of grouping data and KPIs together that's acceptable versus a level of grouping KPIs and data together that's not acceptable. What I generally find when I read, for example, a third party model is that so many like bulk kind of hand wave assumptions have been made that you really can't break them down into constituent parts. You don't know what has actually been incorporated into the projections. To the extent that people can, focusing on going going down to the highest level of detail that they possibly can is kind of the safest route to getting sober projections. So, for example, if we wanted to really intensively model a cultivation facility, we could break cultivars, for example, into like three or four groups. You've got your really finicky, sort of super high tack cultivars. You've got your low producing but sort of not terribly variable cultivars on the other bookend, and then in the middle you have some range of sort of differences between finicky and yield for all intents and purposes. And you could sort of divide those, I would say, into four pieces and just make some bulk assumptions about those. But if you model, for example, your entire facility around, let's just take Blue Dream for example, right? Tends to be quite stable, tends to yield well. If all you sold was a monoculture of Blue Dream, you could probably make assumptions, on one line that were pretty easy. But that's just not the business, right? That's not what consumers are demanding. Consumers want a nice wide variable range of cultivars. They want the flavors, they want the aromas. There's people that want 31 percenters, and candidly there's people that want 11 percenters. That population is definitely out there. Designing your modeling around how to sort of to predict as close to reality as you can what a real sort of sales program might look like. That one is challenging. Generally, I do use a single number to model these things, but I also keep that number very low so that when let's call it my client is presenting these numbers, they should be able to hit that particular assumption or KPI reliably on every harvest with virtually every cultivar. And that gives them the sort of range or the ability to overperform with the more sort of love and care that they put into other cultivars. That's kind of the approach that I take, and the reason that I do that is I purposely dumb down or sort of kneecap some of the assumptions in my pro formas to make sure that they can be at minimum exceeded, at best blown out of the water.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many pro formas I've seen where you see projections at 80 to 100 grams a square foot, and their entire business model is based off of these exceedingly high yields that all cultivars can't achieve. And
Anybody can make money at 80 grams a square foot.
exactly. That's where I don't know about you, but I tend to recommend somewhere between 45 and 55 as a safe assumption,
Yep.
as long as your business model still holds true.
Yeah.
Because those are numbers that most people can achieve realistically.
That's the sort of bingo there, is that the average operator, at least in my experience, consulting with several hundred operators so far, the average operator is they're really hitting between like 39-ish and 55 grams a square foot. That's your average specific yield.
Staying within the theme of financial modeling, I want to talk a little bit about how regulatory stuff impacts you. So how does like the ever-changing regulations and compliance requirements, state by state or country by country in some cases, impact your financial models, and what strategies do you use to stay adaptable in such a dynamic legal environment?
Yeah, I mean, regs are a big deal, right? They're complex, and they often have a potentially nuanced effect on operations, which means that they really need to have a nuanced effect in modeling. We could honestly do like a whole day talk on this, but I'll give you a couple of examples. So regs are going to directly impact the total potential scale of operations. I would say that that's most prominent in cultivation operations, less so potentially for the other business verticals. But that means that there's really a no one size fits all model. The approach has to be bespoke every time for every client to a large extent. And so, being able to recycle models is not something that I think is a good practice. It's not terribly responsible because ultimately, regs, location, team, as we discussed, consumer habits, all of those things, they all kind of compound and end up having a really complex effect for operators and therefore for modeling. So my approach basically is to take every client essentially on a bespoke basis and look at what are their regs, what are the limitations, how ambitious are they? Are they going to be able to reach, for example, full scale, like a standard grower license that just got put out on the SE lottery in Maryland allows for up to 300,000 square feet. I would imagine very, very few, if any, of those licensees are going to scale out to 300,000 square feet. So really understanding what the regs allow, in addition to what the operator is capable of. That's kind of the secret sauce, I think, if you will.
Nice.
Another example is, in newly medical legal or adult use legal, particularly medical legal markets, the regs are materially going to determine how many customers will actually exist at any given time, and how fast they're going to embrace the market. Regulatory hurdles are basically either going to be the friend of regulated operators or the friend of the black market. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. And ultimately, politicians and regulators are mostly going to choose which of these exist and what operators have to deal with as consequences. Sometimes that's a thriving, for example, medical legal market. Sometimes it's a quagmire, as we've seen most recently in Alabama. And then, another sort of topic of conversation in this vein is that costs of compliance are fairly well known at this stage. But we should also, I think, just to sort of be responsible about the conversation, we do have to note that some of the pending federal changes may shake that tree pretty hard in the coming months. And so from an approach standpoint, I'm not sure whether you can model changes. I think modeling needs to be, again, detailed enough in terms of like how many line items you're examining on the cost side of things, that if you have to pivot, you can very rapidly, sort of modify your model responsive to the new regs. And your goal should always be modeling for some type of efficiency, profit efficiency, EBITDA efficiency, those kinds of things, because ultimately those are what's going to buffer you against regulatory changes. That in addition to sort of the potency of your sales program and the potency of your brand. If you have all those things tight, and you've projected them reasonably accurately to how you're going to perform, I would say that regulatory and compliance requirements, they kind of fold themselves in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, it does.
I think you kind of just answered my question with that last statement, but do you have any advice for growers who have to deal with the interpretation of regulations by specific inspectors and how much of an influence that can be on a specific customer in a specific state? I've dealt with it. I'm sure you guys have dealt with it too, where an inspector reads regulations and interprets it in their own way, sometimes driving up compliance costs to a point where my competitors aren't dealing with that, and sometimes it's a luck of the draw of who you get actually inspecting your facility. I think your answer, what you kind of stated was, build efficiency into your business model so you can drive the EBITDA and absorb those changes. But do you have any advice for growers to deal with this kind of, intangibles, these things that pop up around startup and inspections?
Yeah. I mean, the overall, I think, approach is when you're putting together your pro forma, your financial model, your budgets. I never advise a client to cut those to the bone. I think you need some meat on the bone, some extra fat. I always tell people, for example, if your model says that you can survive on $5 million in investment, get 6, keep the $1 million in the kitty, because something is going to come up. If there's anything that characterizes this industry, it's variability and the fact that things are going to come up. With respect to specific inspectors and their approach, their interpretations, the relationship that you have, first thing is it's a relationship. Your inspectors are likely not going anywhere. You don't really have any way of, for example, getting rid of them if you think they're doing a poor job. And, part of my mind always says, with a regulator, your job is to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes or no, sir, thank you very much. We'll get on that. And I think that if you think of it from a relationship standpoint, I always tell operators that I work with, you're in a relationship with your regulators, whether you want to be or not. And you can either take a positive approach to that relationship or a combative or adversarial one. I always recommend to clients, try to be as friendly and professional as you can possibly be. I'm not suggesting sort of greeting them with Starbucks when they arrive, but if you're in an environment where that's not strictly against regs, it can only help. And the reason is, if you're going to come to loggerheads with a regulator over an interpretation, why not do it when you've already established the friendly relationship, the professional rapport? They feel that you're sophisticated. They're at least more likely to take your approach more seriously and to consider, maybe they have a point. Past that, if you have somebody that's going to dig in, you got to have some fluff in your budget to make sure that you can pivot and you can handle it. It just is what it is at that point.
Solid advice.
What key factors do investors look for in financial models and cannabis companies, and how can businesses best position themselves to attract investment?
I would say I as an analyst always start with detail. Detail matters. It shows that the operator, their team, or their consultants, some combination of those, know how the business works in sufficient detail and nuance. If I get a single tab Excel sheet that somebody says, this is my pro forma for my business, I'm not going to move forward with recommending anything there. You got to put the work in. Next is the business plan and its assumption set that informs the pro forma sober? That's a multi-pronged question, but a few of the sort of prongs of that would be, going back to something that we talked about earlier, does the operator's ambition reflect the skill set of the operator's team? Are they likely to be able to pull it off? Does the operator understand the costs involved? Do they know their CapEx? Do they understand their OpEx? Do they know their staffing costs? Or does their financial model simply make woo-woo hand waves that can't be broken down for analysis or validation? Is there a known reasonable schedule that's attached to the assumptions? Because time is money, money is time, schedule matters. Does the owner or operator appreciate the scale of their business in the overall market? Do they think somehow, as if by magic, they're going to start selling 20% of the product in a wholesale market? Do they think they're going to have a reasonable market share with existing competition? Do they see that market share going down with new competition? Questions like that are really important. Then, there's the obvious one, the sizzle, the what's in it for me. That question is, from an investor's perspective, is this investment reasonably likely to perform well enough that my risk is worth not leaving my money in the market and, for example, making 25% this year on a Dow Jones index? It has to have some sizzle in it to be more interesting than that. Now, not every investor is looking to make that kind of return. We see discount rates, ranging 7, 10, 12, up to 18%, sometimes more than that. But you have to make the investment worthy of your investors' cash. Is there an exit plan, a range of exit plans in mind that are reasonable and well conceived? You don't have to start with, my company's going to exit, at the end of year 4, but the operator and the entrepreneurs, they at least need to know what an exit plan might look like, and the impact on exit value for their investor class as a result of executing that business plan. And timing, I think, is very important. There's a lot of people who come in with big saucer sized eyes and think, oh, I'm going to make millions of dollars in 1 year or 2 years. The reality is that's not very often the case. Most cannabis investments that I see, they need to mature to 3, 4, 5 years before their sort of yield curve in terms of net enterprise value is maximized. So you're there for a while. You better have a good relationship with your investors. You better have given them good expectations, balanced expectations. Lastly, I would say there's 2 closely related questions. How much skin does the founding team have in the game? And again, closely related, what resources are already on the table? And the reason I mention that is that, number one, investors care. If you have some skin in the game, they want to know that you're aligned with them. And if you lose, or the company loses, they lose, and you lose something in the process. But then, resources on the table matters a lot as well. Do you own your property? If you do, is there, for example, a building that's already there that's ready to kind of receive the tenant improvements that constitute your build out for your business? If yes, suddenly you're a lot more attractive, particularly in this day and age, because you're going to make any equity investor feel better about sort of total skin and resources in the game, and you may have something that can sort of be used as part of a security package for debt, which is becoming more and more important, I would say. Generally speaking, I would say that kind of satisfactory answers to all of the questions that I just mentioned are pretty essential to success in getting investors on board with essentially your cannabis startup idea.
It's interesting. I think we often hear investors, all of us have heard investors talk about their exit strategy for these projects, right? And but on the flip side, I think what we all see too is a lot of value engineering into the project to save some capex that ultimately devalues the asset to the point where it's almost not attractive to future acquisitions or M&A, or I see it quite a bit where, it's all private equity. And so essentially they don't have enough money to invest the right amount of money in all the systems to make the facility adhere to quality, quantity, efficiency, consistency throughout the life of this building. And then I don't know, maybe very few of them actually get to exit because of that. How do you suggest investors manage that CapEx struggle while also creating an asset value that's attractive to future M&A?
Yeah, complex question.
Yeah.
The first thing that I always try to address is designing the basis of design, designing the basis of operations, designing your schedule and your pro forma around what you're reasonably able to do. And what I mean is, if you have the choice between I'll pick on cultivation because this is so often the case in cultivation. If you have the choice between a 10,000 square foot facility that costs you a little bit more, but that you know is likely to be on point in terms of quality, consistency, safety, yield, those kinds of parameters, versus, for example, spending a little less per square foot and getting a 15,000 square foot facility that you've made some compromises on, I would virtually every time choose the smaller, more likely to be efficient facility, and spend that little extra bit of money, let's call it on a square foot basis, to achieve that. I think what ends up happening is that sometimes people get stuck on, for example, maximizing canopy to the most that they're able to do under their license, for example, and they're not thinking about the efficiency of their operation, and that takes a bunch of different forms, and I'll just mention a couple. So, skimping, for example, on lighting and climate control in order to have more canopy. I've never seen that work out for anybody. The likelihood of having major IPM issues, major quality issues, potentially crop failure, and just the propensity of a less well-designed or less well-specified facility to get you to those sort of premier yields that you're chasing. I just wouldn't take that trade-off, because what ultimately happens is in that instance, facility A, the slightly more expensive one that's a little bit smaller, is able to get yields that build almost pure profit on top, versus the other facility that is closer, if not constantly struggling with being able to hit its numbers. And that can be difficult in a myriad of ways. It can impact your sales cycle. It can impact the ability of your sales team to hold on to, for example, wholesale relationships, if you've had variability in quality, consistency, potency, those kinds of things. So I would always err in the direction of assuring the highest level of what you're after, if that makes sense. If what you're after is high quality craft, go after the highest level of high quality craft. If you're going after low cost biomass, that's a totally different business model, and that's a totally legit business model. That's what you want to sort of spend for, if that makes sense. And again, it is complex to explore how to achieve that. But I would say that focus needs to be on doing the best you can do with the dollars that you have in front of you. And sometimes that's not just a total canopy equation. It's really a total potential yield equation, taking into account quality of yield, quantity of yield, consistency of yield, and then other factors that may or may not matter to your end customer.
Great answer. That's a lot of good stuff for people to think about. And I think a lot of people do fall into the trap of, I have 25,000 square feet of canopy allowed on my license. I'm going to build 25,000 square feet of flowering canopy. And maybe they can't, their budget cannot always afford that much square footage.
So, taking a look a little bit into like revenue projections and profitability, can you discuss the most critical variables that affect revenue projections and profitability in the cannabis industry? And how do you account for these in your models?
Sure. The simple answers are scale, talent of team, proper capitalization, and timing. If we want to get into sort of more complex answers, what I would generally say is that speed to market sort of has been, is, and is becoming more and more important in sort of how you roll out a business. Operators that are quick to the market, assuming they have all of the things that we just talked about a moment ago, which is, sort of all of the parameters of yield, quality, quantity, consistency, potency, those kinds of things. They're going to command, in many cases, absolutely monstrous profits that will decline away from them over time, So, if you are able to come to market rapidly with quality product, the likelihood of you being able to sort of pull in those extra margins, those extra profits, pay off your investors, pay off your debt, and stabilize the business, they're substantially higher than any other circumstance. So that I would say is sort of undoubtedly important and something that people need to think carefully about. Then sort of a lot of this stuff is related, right? And this is related to what we spoke about a moment ago. The ability to identify, plan to achieve, and then actually achieve whatever your major KPIs are, whether that's grams THC throughput in a lab, whether it's grams per square foot at cultivation, whether it's customers per hour complex with average basket in a retail scenario. You have to know what those things are that you're trying to do, right? You have to sort of know your destination. You have to plan to achieve your destination. And then you have to actually go through the journey to achieve the journey, right? Or to get to your destination. For cultivation, your major KPIs are things like average specific yield. That's grams per square foot, either per cycle or other unit time. That could be per year. Average TAC is obviously very important. Average terpene yield is becoming more and more important these days. One of the ones that I don't see people monitoring, but that's extremely important, and it relates to all of the others, is I would call it average flowering plant vigor, which is, if you were to sort of rate your plants on a scale from, for example, 1 to 100, you should see a giant lumping of them over in the, sort of 80 to 100 range. And where I've seen, particularly in consults, clients having issues is that their plant count is always the same, right? They have the same number of flowering plants, but they have a whole bunch of really weak, non-vigorous plants that are in there. And that can be a really difficult thing to overcome. And the bottom line there is the more the variability away from your high watermark KPIs, right? For example, average flowering plant vigor, the more problematic your operations are going to be, right? So that's where all of that planning to win, pursuing the plan, and figuring out the way to achieve those KPIs is so important, because everything needs to be lumped as close as possible to your high watermark KPIs. That's where you're maximizing everything. You're maximizing cash turnover, you're maximizing ROI, you're maximizing exit value, you're maximizing every sale, every employee, and so on and so forth. For CPG manufacturers, you've got major KPIs that are sort of throughput and supply chain based. Can you as an operator obtain quality extractable materials on a regular basis? I know that that's a drastic challenge for a lot of people in the market in many instances. And then on the other side of that, does the operator have the equipment and potentially automation responsive to their ambitions? Have you set yourself up where you're going to be hand pouring gummies out of, sort of ketchup squirt bottles to the tune of, 100,000 units a month? If that's your ambition, it's probably not going to work, and you're probably going to run into some of the sort of classic bottlenecking factors that people come to in manufacturing. For retailers, those major KPIs are sort of, in their case, they're obvious and they're non-obvious, right? So for example, an obvious one is average basket per customer, right? That's easy. How much is the average person going to spend when they come into my store? And there are ways to engineer that up and down, but within a range, it's probably going to be somewhat consistent, right? The less obvious one, and much more nuanced, is how sticky is your customer relationship with customers at your store. And what I mean is, if a customer walks through the door, how likely is it that customer who just came in and purchased from you is ever going to come back? Because that may actually be the most important thing that your store can do, is establish that really sticky, really reliable relationship with customers. Because ultimately, let's take a medical environment. Your average medical consumer is going to spend between $1,800 and $3,000 per year reliably, right? Down to the person. You want them spending that 18 to 300,000 or $3,000 at your store as reliably as possible. And that's one of those that's a lot more nuanced. That comes down to product selection, how your bud tenders are trained, ambiance, product mix. There's a lot that goes into that. That I think for the inexperienced retailer ends up feeling like voodoo to an extent, and to the seasoned retailer, it's sort of an obvious way that they approach the relationship with their customers.
That was something
Generally. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that was something that our colleague Leaf, really harped on and really focused on when we did Kind Love at the retail side, was retention.
Yep.
And I think you can get anyone to come into your retail store once. Can you get them to come back? And I remember at one point Leaf had not just incentivized them they got like if you came back, first time visitors got like a special type of coupon essentially. And I know not all states allow for these coupons depending on the regulatory, but the ones that do, it was a way to get someone to come back into your store. And then I think there was even a secondary coupon for your second visit. And I think the rationale at the time was like, look, if I can get someone to come into my store 3 times, and I can't lock them in, then I need to reevaluate everything. But that stickiness that you were talking about, retention, I mean, at the retail level, it's everything.
Give people a great experience and a reason to come back, and they absolutely will come back. I firmly believe that. Is there a section of the sort of consumer public that is completely agnostic?
I learned at retail. I operated a retail location in Denver, Kind Love, for 5 years with my partners. And what I learned at Kind Love was that women, seniors, and the sick, when we talk about the medical market, they're about as loyal as they get. Once they find their spot, they put you right in their daily or weekly routine. They come every Thursday or whatever their routine is. Young men, they'll go into any sketchy retail spot. They don't care if they hear there's fire or a good deal. They're going to go in that door. But women and seniors, when they're driving by and they look at I know dispensaries have really evolved over the last 15 years, but there's still some kind of dodgy ones out there. And if they don't feel safe when they're driving by, they're not even stopping. Men, on the other hand, young men, let's say ages 21 to 35, they're going into they'll crawl through a little Alice in Wonderland door if they know there's some fire OG on the other side. So that was
So
something I learned, is that young men are not the most loyal when it comes to retail shopping.
Yep. And the thing that I didn't mention, and you're sort of poking it square on, is that you have to know your consumer. Know that your consumer is after a deal. Great. Then that's part of your basis of operations. Know that you're catering to a local community of seniors. Great. Now you know that you need to have slightly brighter light, slightly larger font on menus. You need to be a little bit slower when you're talking. All the little nuances of just high quality customer service, because ultimately that's the business you're in. Right.
Man, you nailed it.
Dude, that's what I operated a retail license in Arkansas when the state first went legal. And that meant everything to us. It was a new state where cannabis had never been legal. It was a medical market. We were in Texarkana, Arkansas. And knowing the demographic and knowing the customer base made all the difference in our initial success at launch. And to your point, do they want a deal? It was so obvious. I dubbed it the Walmart effect in Arkansas. For those who don't know, Walmart was founded in Bentonville, Arkansas. And something about that Walmart effect, everyone in Arkansas wanted to feel like they were getting a deal, and they wanted to feel welcome. And it was intimidating for a lot of people. And so every morning opening that store, I told my staff, just be nice, just be nice to people.
Go a long way.
Goes such a long way.
So looking forward a little bit, What kind of emerging trends or developments do you see influencing the financial landscape of the cannabis industry? And how should companies prepare their financial strategies to stay ahead?
Right on. Um, I would say the first and most obvious trend, at least from sort of industry intimate side of the coin, is a sort of sharp move from majority equity financing to majority debt financing in a lot of instances, and everything that goes with that, the variability of debt terms, for example, coupon rate, inconvenience fees, the term of a note, those kinds of things. And what I would say generally is that this is kind of wide open and highly variable. Reasonable debt is an operator's best friend, and it's very hard to find. That's not to say you can't find it, you just have to put the work in. And parasitic debt that's virtually guaranteed to bankrupt an operator is a dime a dozen. It's virtually everywhere. I would say that the ongoing trend towards multi-layer horticulture is probably a crucial one. I think that's one that everyone knows is there, and that continues to be an area that we specialize in. Trends in automation, I would say, are often moving targets, fast moving targets that need to be considered very carefully. And that's not to say that automation is bad, for example. It's just that it's moving quickly. And unless you're absolutely certain that you need automation and it's going to be effective for your business, over at minimum the payback period of the automation, you really have to make sure you're making careful decisions in that context.
We see
Also,
that a lot, right, Ian, in the field, where someone automates like a certain part of their business, but not the other complementary parts. And so, or they'll kind of go overboard where they should have done something more like semi-automated, and they went for like all the bells and whistles, and they only run this machine like once every 7 days. Is there like do you have like a threshold or best practice for like if the ROI is less than X amount of time, it doesn't make sense? Or how do you look at that when you look at automation and return on investment?
Yeah, that's a tough one, particularly in this industry. My rule is generally don't ever automate something that you can't do very, very well by hand. Because if you can't do it well by hand, you don't know what's going wrong when the automation starts. And automation gives you the ability to screw up really, really fast and to a larger extent than without it. So I always tell people with humans in the equation, you at least have multiple opportunities to ensure quality control. So the rule of thumb kind of doesn't exist. I would say that you make those decisions once you've mastered something, let's call it by hand or in a mostly semi-automated fashion. And you really just need to be running sensitivity analyses on these things that take into account, is this product type going to be around for a long time? Are we making enough of it to justify the investment into automation? And then, is this actually more efficient than doing this by hand? And in cannabis, that can be difficult, right? Particularly if you have to make those decisions up front, because if you're later in the cycle of your business process where you have free cash flow from operations that you can use for internal reinvestments, you can make those decisions fairly easily. But when you're in sort of anywhere in the startup phase arc of your business, you really may not have access to that much spare capital, and so you're really making decisions about, do I pay X number of workers Y amount of salary or sort of pay on a monthly basis, or do I sort of make this giant investment right up front that I may not be able to recover for some time? And that can be a really challenging decision to make. So, sort of dorking out in your Excel spreadsheets is really the only way to do that. And as I mentioned very early in the conversation, doing your analysis at a sufficient level of detail is kind of critical to making sure you're making the right decision.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
In this, as like the cannabis industry is evolving so quickly, and with that, all the technology that goes into these businesses, whether it's automation, HVAC systems, lighting, controls systems. I guess my question is, how do you address that in a building that has a potential, like let's say cultivation facility, that has a potential useful life of 20, 25 years? Obviously, we're going to have to retrofit some technology, but a lot of this technology is new and somewhat unvetted. How do you go about vetting what is the smart investment for these pieces of technology over the life of these facilities? Any advice or things to look out for? It's all so new.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge. You've got a lot of relatively small manufacturers that are supplying a lot of the, let's call it technology, or the FF&E that's going into these facilities. We've seen, lighting manufacturers, I think are a good one to pick on, sort of pop in and out of reality in this industry. And, with that goes warranty, support, things like that. I think a lot of decisions need to be made in that particular context. And then, life cycle cost is another important one. I would say that that's most important on the energy hungry portions of a project. That's lighting and climate control. You can make the decision to spend literally one half on your HVAC system or on your lighting in order to save CapEx up front. But that decision may end up impacting essentially the entire profit arc of your business. You may have to replace things soon. You may have warranty issues or non-existent warranty issues. You may have efficiency issues. You may have giant power bills that you could have avoided to a large extent by sort of prepaying for more efficient equipment. It's a nuanced approach, and I think that energy and energy cost analysis is something that I don't see very many would-be entrepreneurs doing as much as they probably should. And that's something that I would say, like, you must do this.
Nice. So taking off the kind of, I don't know, CPA accountant kind of hat that we've been put on your head of the first handful of questions, I'm going to put on that kind of more so GC hat of yours. What are some of the unique construction challenges you face when building a CEA cannabis facility, and how do you overcome them to ensure successful project completion and timeliness of completion?
And that's definitely like one of the biggest questions.
Yeah.
I would say the first and most important overall challenge is to sort of take a step back and realize that to a large extent, cannabis facilities can either be a total unicorn or a partial unicorn in terms of the real estate and the built improvements. There's really not very many versions where you're not some kind of unicorn. And this isn't necessarily obvious to a lot of operators. And what I mean by that is an operator needs to consider what happens to their facility if the business plan fails. That's a really crappy conversation to have with yourself. It's a crappy conversation to have with your team, and it can be a crappy conversation to have with your would-be investors. But you're a person who's asking investors to trust you, and a carefully and soberly conceived fallback position or worst case scenario, it's just a matter of professionalism and fiduciary duty. And to be clear, what I'm saying is, if and when a business fails, the value that still remains in the underlying PPE, property, plant, and equipment, needs to be somewhat known or projected. For retailers, it's really straightforward. You got a building, you have an interior, the interior can be demolished, it can be reused for the next tenant. On the other bookend, cultivators, where there's a possibility of having a facility that's like 100% designed around cultivating, finicky cannabis in a controlled environment, it may not have any other reasonable future use unless, for example, it's a warehouse that again can be sort of demolished and sort of returned to its original use. That's a true unicorn that may be very close to worthless if the project fails. And that's something that I don't see being taken into account. Manufacturers often find themselves in the middle of those two extremes, sort of one side to the other, depending on how their business plan or their investment has worked
I
out.
I find that to me, from a risk profile standpoint, if you're going to build a bespoke greenhouse that's specifically for cannabis in some obscure location that's not in an agricultural area, that seems like a real dagger to me, in the chest, because all day
Yep.
long, I'll take an indoor building with good power that can be repurposed to something else. But if you have a very bespoke greenhouse and the repurposing on that, the value of that, sold as anything but what it was intended for, and if it failed, for what it was intended for, that's a really scary, asset to have on your books, in my opinion. Would you
It
say that
is, and I've
there's
done it.
a lot less? All right, sounds like you're in alignment too. There
Well,
seems to
Yeah,
be a lot less
my
look all
risk
the
on buildings.
all the cut flower greenhouses in California that got repurposed into cannabis facilities, and they all failed too. Like it was not
Yep.
all of them, but it was all most of them did.
A lot of them.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
difficult. It's really difficult. If you're late to the market, I think the dangers there actually escalate a bit because your uphill climb to get the shelf into the book of buyers becomes steeper. Power and switch gear, as well as some of your specialty HVAC equipment, can be particularly problematic if you haven't planned for it in advance. That the key there is having a schedule that's realistic, working with your design professionals to react to project requirements, and being aware of lead times. This is always less perilous, I would say, on the retail side than it is on the production asset side. And I would say on the same note, the availability of experienced contractors capable of delivering a cannabis project on time, budget, and quality is getting better, but it remains difficult. As an aspiring operator, you really need to vet your vendors properly to make sure that they're going to be able to deliver.
As a GC, I know we're getting close to an hour, and I appreciate you spending so much time with us, but I'm curious, what is, with your GC hat on, and we're talking about indoor cultivation facilities here, what's the number one mistake you see in the construction of these buildings across the board? What's the most common mistake you see?
The most common and sometimes the most fatal mistake is not having the availability of power that's necessary for your project. I mean, you're talking about just yoking yourself to struggle. If you, for example, buy a property, it's got a 400 amp single phase service, and you need 4 megawatts for your project. You're in real trouble if you've done something like that. Aside from that, it's really understanding, sort of scope and ambition of your project. If you don't totally understand that, you're in trouble. I guess those are the two easiest ones to address.
Ian, I'm probably going to have you back on the podcast in like 3 months or 6 months so we can talk more. Every now and then we get a
Cool.
guest like you who just has a lot of key insights and can talk across a lot of different landscapes. And so we'll usually do multiple ones, but I think you definitely fall into that category. And normally I ask this question kind of before all the, business questions, if you will. And if you're comfortable sharing, most people tell their cannabis story of like how their first crop, which a lot of it comes back to college and a closet or some kind of creative thing as a youthful person. But I know your story, and if you're willing to share it, I think it's quite unique. So if you're comfortable, would you mind sharing some details around your first cannabis crop and kind of what inspired you to do that?
The short version of it is that I've actually tried cannabis for a variety of things, and it doesn't actually work for me. I get paradoxical effects as serious as I can smoke or consume THC in the middle of the day, and I will not be able to sleep properly for like the next week, which is exactly the opposite of how it works for virtually everyone I know. They're able to get an incredible sleep, incredible sort of relief from anxiety and things like that. So it was never a large part of my life personally. However, when my dad was in his late 20s, he was struck by a boat while basically snorkeling down in the Florida Keys, lost his right arm up to the shoulder, nearly died. And in that time, the best thing they could do for you essentially was cauterize the wound, stitch it up, staunch the bleeding, give you as much morphine as your body could handle, and give you as much blood as they could possibly get into you to reestablish blood pressure. So, my dad started that day, let's call it a right-handed, able-bodied, very strong and capable construction worker. And he ended that day virtually with an instantaneous and then lifelong opiate addiction and Hep C that came to him in a blood transfusion. And over the course of about 30 years between using opiates, between having Hep C, between trying to get off of opiates and drinking alcohol, he really he ruined his liver. And he called me when I was in university and said, in tears, my doctor says I'm in liver failure. I have 3 to 6 months to live. And because I'm an opiate addicted, Hep C infected alcoholic, the chances of getting me a donor liver are substantially zero. What do I do? And, my first inclination was, well, you need to look at alternative therapies. And candidly, what I meant at the time was, why don't you look at acupuncture, massage, those kinds of things. He apparently took that as, well, I need to get medical weed, and went into his doctor and basically asked about medical cannabis. He did that in front of a physician's assistant, sort of with the doctor, got kicked out of the office because it was not legal to have those kinds of discussions at that day and age. And, fortunately, the doctor met him at the front of the building and said, I'm sorry I had to kick you out. You can't ask me illegal questions in front of my PAs. But I've got 17 oncology patients who are using RSO, and I don't understand why the results are what they are, but they're doing better than anybody else that I'm caring for. You don't have a history of cancer, so you can't swallow anything because you don't want first pass hepatic metabolism, but you can go ahead and try smoking. And so Dad called me and said, I don't want to be a criminal. I don't want to buy from drug dealers. And I was finishing a molecular genetics degree at that time that was focused in horticulture. And I said, okay, I'm just gonna geek out and grow you some cannabis. And I had a friend who was a traditional market dealer who I had helped out in the past. And I called him up and I said, hey, are you able to get your hands on any clones? And literally within an hour, he had 4 clones in my living room. And I grew my dad a couple of pounds of, larfy but decent cannabis. It was nothing to write home about, but I delivered it to him at home in a duffel bag. And I said, don't call me if you have taken pills. And just, sort of set the gauntlet in front of him. And 3 months later, he gave me a call and sort of told me how he was. And, he was stoned as shit, wandering around the backyard, gardening tomatoes. But he hadn't taken any pills and he wasn't drinking. And when he went to his doctor, he went from 8% liver function, which is unsurvivable, to 12%, which is kind of marginally survivable. And the doctor said, look, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. His liver was damaged to the extent that I don't think he ever got above 12%. But he lasted another 4.5 years until a pharmaceutical company, I believe, based in San Francisco, came up with a breakthrough hepatitis C eradication treatment. And we were able to get him that drug. And once he had that drug, his levels came up. and he was able to, sort of have a happy, healthy rest of his existence. So, for him, medical cannabis, let's call it, was truly a 5-year bridge to life. That, if he was stuck on the traditional pharma program and drinking and all that, he never would have had that opportunity. And so when I had the opportunity to sell a couple of businesses and say, what the heck do I want to do next? Medical cannabis for others, to sort of give other people the opportunity to have that kind of chance and that relief was a pretty obvious decision for me. So I'm not here for myself. I'm in this industry because I believe in the power of the herb to change people's lives. From like a very deep level, if that makes sense.
That's an amazing story, Ian. I appreciate you sharing. And I think it's a good reminder for everyone listening too. Sometimes I've been in cannabis for over a decade, all of my adult life, and it's nice to hear these stories and almost get reminded about the reason why we're really doing it. You can get so entrenched in the day-to-day of cultivation and whatever you're doing out there, but this plant really helps a lot of people and it's impacted so many people's lives. And I appreciate you sharing. It's a good reminder.
No doubt.
We're all so passionate about this.
Well, Ian, on that note, thank you for sharing as always. Always a pleasure to catch up with you. I look forward to the next time we have you on Cultivation Elevated.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Have a great day. Talk soon.
Thanks, Ian.